sound is extremely important to immersion. A lot of the immersion that I felt while playing Amnesia was because of the sound.
Yeah, ambient sound is probably a lot more effective than even music is for setting ambience. Music can be a real mood setter, but as far as actual ambience, it's the wind, it's the creaking doors and windows, it's the animal sounds, depending on what game you're in.
The footsteps that you hear that aren't really there.
Mm-hmm.
And this just might be because I don't play these kinds of games very often, but I don't feel as immersed when I play something like Mario or really any platforming game or any fighting game or any RPG. But I don't feel as immersed when I play games like that as I do when I play something like Silent Hill or Amnesia. I think it might be more that I'm on the edge of my seat, trying not to get scared, so I end up scaring myself.
Well, ambient sound can work in a lot of different ways, and it's not just when it's necessary either. For when you're walking by a waterfall, you're going to, of course, hear the water. When something's on fire, you're, of course, going to hear the fire. And it doesn't have to be a freaky situation like Slender or Amnesia. Or I think some of the newer games are probably the better examples of this simply because the technology is so much better. Just turn the music off on Skyrim and just wander around the forest a little bit. You'll hear a lot of that little background stuff that really fitting. And then even on a simpler note, you can take something like Minecraft, which back in the day before it got really super popular, a lot of its ambience came from just the subtle nature of the sounds. There's no birds, there's no wind or anything. It's just footsteps and the clump, clump, clump of you digging. But you get used to listening for the sounds of the zombie moans and the hisses of the creepers, that it became part of that immersion. You start paying attention to the sounds, not just the visual cues.
Well, and I've noticed that in a lot of games anymore, you don't have static background music. It's like there is music in the game, but it's not on a loop. It starts and stops, so that it's a definitive tune.
Separated motifs, so that when you're in a quiet area, the music will be quieter, and then something will happen, and then it'll switch to a different track that kind of melds with the original, so it adds more of a pace to it, more of an excitement, and then it'll pull back when the action's over with.
Yeah, and I am a big fan of dynamic soundtracks.
Oh, yes.
That was one of the best things that I think has ever happened to a video game sound.
And I remember back in the original Xbox, there was a demo that was trying to showcase this very technology, and at the time, the demo they were showing was fantastic. If I remember right, it was a country tune that merged into a heavy metal tune simply by moving these sliders. And it basically was several different tracks recorded differently, and then as each slider moved, it would meld them back and forth in between each other. And it would change the mood entirely every time. I don't know a lot about this game, but I think it uses the same tactics. There's a gigantic craze over in Japan called Idolmaster, where you're basically trying to get these pop star singer girls from nobodies to somebodies. Each and every song has been recorded by each and every one of these voice actresses, so that each time they sing, it's their version of it. And then when you get them together, sometimes you can mix and match which two or which three or what group is singing together. So it's recorded multiple times, and I think that's a direction we need to see more of our music taking, is that I know it's a lot more cost, and we're already seeing ridiculous amounts of budget going into video games these days, sometimes just on the basis of getting voice acting talent alone sometimes. And yeah, seeing music meld and switch to the point that you don't even notice it anymore.
That is a pretty cool feature. I would agree that is a direction that I would like to see more things go. But at the same time, it's like what you said with the cost. It's becoming so high that we're not likely to see very many games utilize that outside of the AAA studios moving forward.
Because I don't think there's ever going to be a complete removal of the, quote, soundtrack. There's just too many arcade games out there, and I'm glad for this. This is the same argument I have with the 3D versus 2D thing. I think there's room for both styles. The last section of it, which is the voice acting, I think it's really changed the way games have immersed themselves, because before it was, of course, you had to read everything, and that wasn't exactly a bad thing. Matter of fact, it was one of the selling points to a lot of earlier video game systems, is, hey, it's teaching kids to read, and that it's cool to read. But at the same time, you cannot deny the impact of voice on video games. Matter of fact, I think Final Fantasy X stands as a special place in my heart because of the voice acting came in on it. When voice acting is done right, it can really change everything. From whether it's just people yelling in your ear, barking orders in some sort of military game, to just that familiar tone of you picking your units in something like StarCraft or Warcraft. You just get the feel for the personality of characters so much better than if it was just text on the screen.
I liked Final Fantasy X's voiceovers. Resident Evil had some of the worst voice acting.
The thing about Resident Evil 1 is it's a lot like Mortal Kombat 1. It was supposed to be referential of a lot of bad movies. when you think of it that way, the acting in it suddenly made a lot more sense. The woodenness of it was part of its charm. It wasn't supposed to be all serious and spooky like the later games became. The Mortal Kombat, the original, was supposed to be poking fun and homaging all those goofy, chop-socky, mystical movies that was coming out of Hong Kong in the 80s and 90s. And then it turned into kind of a parody of itself simply because it went so serious. So Resident Evil's voice acting is classic and as legendary as it is now. I can forgive it a little better.
Yeah.
Simply because also I was watching anime at the time, and that was some atrocious dubbing back in those days.
Well, and
it wasn't until the late 90s before that started getting worked out.
And the live-action movie sequences in Resident Evil kind of make you think that it's supposed to be camp. It was pretty bad, though. I mean, even for as bad as they were probably trying to be, it was still pretty bad.
I've never really had voice acting really get to me that much. I've had some voice acting characters turn me off from a game.
Oh, yeah.
Amy in any Sonic game, as soon as I hear Amy's voice, I want to not even play the game anymore. I hate her voice that much.
You hadn't played any of the Elder Scrolls until you got to Skyrim, didn't you?
I played Oblivion.
But
yeah, some of
earlier
the stuff on there can get extremely repetitive. You can tell a voice is recycled again and again for characters.
That doesn't bother me so much simply because, and that's why I was asking, is because of Morrowind hardly had any voice acting. It was usually just a lot of hellos, goodbyes, and that kind of thing. And the rest and most of them were the same people too. So
exactly.
When Fallout 3 came along, and I didn't play Oblivion, and Skyrim only improved upon that. But, for one thing, when you're reusing voice actors a lot in a single game, when you have a game as big as the Elder Scrolls series, that's kind of forgivable. Well, I have a hard time remembering anything that had really good voice acting until the PS2 era.
Yeah.
Even the Dreamcast era games, they were kind of... Shenmue was kind of a classic for being, what? What's this?
Yeah.
They didn't translate this dialogue very well, did they? And of course, the famous X-Play montage of, have you seen any sailors? But yeah.
Yes.
But that's changed a lot lately. The last 14 years have been really good to voice acting. Matter of fact, some people have made some really solid careers out of it. And we'll probably have a show on voice acting all by itself eventually because it's one of those big topics, even if you guys don't have a lot to say about it, more than what you already have. So that being said, we'll go ahead and move on. And that kind of covers sound. And then there's visuals. Visuals is a lot trickier when it comes to immersion because it is largely solely the entire reason, aside from gameplay itself, what draws people in. It's why so many of modern players put so much emphasis on the graphics.
Mm-hmm.
I don't go so crazy with graphics. Graphics can be not superb and still be great. Mm-hmm. I guess Minecraft is a perfect example for that. Mm-hmm. Many people that are graphic crazy say that game is hideous.
And in a lot of ways it is. Even if you do forgive the fact that it was originally made by like 3 different people. Mm-hmm. And largely...
I thought it was pretty ugly. It didn't bother me because I knew what kind of game it was, but it is pretty ugly.
I've still never had a single person yet that I got to play the game and that they didn't go crazy over it. Even hardcore players are like, oh, I will never enjoy this game. I've got them to play it, and as soon as they do, they're hooked immediately.
I played it, but I didn't really get hooked.
But you played the old version, or have you played it since it...
No, I only played it in alpha.
Okay.
When it was classic era, man. Wow.
Yeah. Things have changed a lot since then. There's actually things to do. There's reasons for you to do things. It's not just randomly building. Of course, if you want to randomly build, that's still there.
You can beat the game now. There is an ending.
So we have things like lighting effects. I remember when the earlier lighting effects really started taking place, as serious lighting effects, not just like pre-rendered or anything.
Doom 3?
I was actually thinking about Splinter Cell. There was,
in
the demo, there was so much that was really showcasing the lighting system in that, from the holes in the ceiling and the boarded up windows that were shining the little lights through, to how the shadows were being affected by moving objects and everything like that. It really blew a lot of people's minds, and it was showing what the Xbox could really handle back in that day. And even though the whole bloom thing was kind of ridiculous, it kind of reminds me of J.J. Abrams' love affair with lens flare. It's just everywhere. It was hard to get away from it back in those days. It's a little more manageable now, but you still see a lot of it. I think we just got used to it. Yeah. But there are times it's really useful. For example, Fallout 3 again. The first time you emerge from the vault for the first time, and you open the door and everything just goes really bright. That is kind of an immersive thing, because you've been in this dark thing for 18 years, and now you're popping out into the daylight. Of course it's going to be ridiculously bright. And a matter of fact, the first time I played it, that brightness kind of stayed with me. I don't know if it was just a me thing, but that brightness stayed with me for the first few minutes of playing. The way they did the lighting, that it made it feel like that bloom was hanging there just a little longer than it should have been, just to help sell that effect.
I think it does too. I think the game,
I think so.
when you first leave, is really bright until you reach a megaton, or if you get a certain distance away, then it goes away.
Yeah.
And you can't say enough about texture details. The higher res the textures, the more detailed the bump maps and everything, that always affects things. But it's not the only thing that needs to be there. I've seen some really effective games on older systems that you could still play today and be just about as immersive. I know we get spoiled on the higher quality graphics every time they get updated. It's harder and harder for us to go back to the old games and still feel as immersed as we do, because it's not the latest technology, so we're kind of being reminded of that.
Does anybody else get headaches and stuff from going from an older game to a newer game? It just seems like you get used to that, to the graphics of that, or maybe it's just the pixels or something, and then you switch back to a higher quality game and it actually hurts your eyes, gives you headaches.
The only two examples I know of that is either the games with a ridiculous amount of particle effects like waves and Geometry Wars that just have colors and things flashing everywhere, but that's natural. It doesn't matter what game you played before you play it, that's still going to affect you that way. And then the people that have a lot of vertigo or motion sickness from 3D games.
I do get vertigo, that's probably why.
I knew a lot of people when Super Mario 64 first came out, they loved the look of it, they loved to play it, but it made them sick because it was just too much motion. They actually felt the heights sometimes. And we're talking Nintendo 64 here, where the draw distances were kind of short.
Like to see those same people take a dive off of the towers in Assassin's Creed.
Yeah. And speaking of which, motion blur, that has been a big change in video games in the last several years, especially for racing games, but just about every game is adopting it. I think even Gears of War does it a little bit when you're doing that really chunky run. Doesn't it kind of motion blur the background?
I think so.
It's been a while since I played it, so I can't remember.
Yeah, same here.
And then there's a newer effect where what you're focusing on in the middle of the screen is the clearest, and it kind of blurs out the further out you get.
Oh, that's been really popular in first-person shooters. Mm-hmm. Another interesting thing, kind of along the same lines, was in Borderlands, there was a gun that had a scope on it, and even if you weren't aiming, you could still see the scope, the way your character's holding the gun, you could see the scope on the screen. Mm-hmm. Where the target reticle is actually displayed in the scope, and you can see it. And I thought that was a pretty neat effect.
Sometimes those little details really stand out. Mm-hmm. I remember the first time I played Grand Theft Auto 3, which the whole thing about when the door gets lodged open because of a faulty getting in or something like that, and he'll reach over and shut it, that is such a little stupid minor thing, but it adds so much to a game, adding those little details like that.
I remember that too. I thought that was pretty cool.
And it doesn't just extend to the player themselves, it's also the characters around them. I know there's all sorts of games that are really trying to push what the NPCs can do, like Assassin's Creed. They'll flock, they'll talk to each other, they'll react to the character in different ways. Some of them will chase around you begging for money and such. Grand Theft Auto 4 did a lot of that type of stuff. People would be on their cell phones or be reading a newspaper or something like that. There's a lot of
the entire time.
And then there's a lot of games that are trying to actually make routines that people will go through. I know Skyrim does this, where they'll have a routine of they'll go to their house at a certain time of day, they'll go out of their house, go to their work, be there for a while, and then come back to their house. That seems like such a simple thing, but when you have a whole bunch of people doing that, to the point that you actually know where they are at all times, you can follow them and see what they do throughout their day. I know that's a little stalkerish, but still, it kind of shows where the immersion is getting with that type of thing. And that kind of leads us into animations. Predominantly, the early 3D animation was all hand animated. So it was a little stiff, it was a little blocky, and then full motion capture came along, and it really softened up a lot of that type of stuff. And especially when the newer systems got more and more complicated, so that fingers actually moved instead of, fists and chunks of fingers and such.
Yeah.
And the mouths started getting fancy. And now seeing the latest demos for stuff like Beyond and The Last of Us, it'll just blow your mind how far we've come with facial expressions and stuff like that.
Yeah, it's movie quality.
So here's another question. You were talking about Borderlands. Do you think techniques like cell shading can hurt the immersion of a game?
No.
Does it always have to be super realistic?
I thought the cell shading in Wind Waker was really good. The way they did it, the characters were able to be very expressive.
Gorgeous animation.
Yeah, to me that kind of level of animation it has an immersive quality to it. It's hard for me to get super immersed immersed, like I said, in those kinds of games anyway, as far as feeling like I'm there. But as for being drawn into the world, that game did a pretty good job of it.
And some games really try to play up that world like it did, and like Okami. And I'm glad to see that it's not a style that has been completely forgotten, because Borderlands 2 sold really, really well. So there's a lot of games from back in the older days that would be just as highly remembered if they hadn't gone the route of being so hyper-realistic, because now they look dated. However, the more cartoonier games, say Mario 64, are a little more timeless because they went the more cartoony route. They don't age quite as badly.
And that's why Super Mario Kart will always look like Super Mario Kart. I could go back to the old SNES one, and it doesn't feel outdated that bad.
Go back to the old Tomb Raider games. A lot of them still have as solid a gameplay as they ever did, if you can forgive the horrible camera controls. But the look of the game is so blocky and dated, there's a lot of people that would have a really hard time playing it now. I heard people complaining about the whole HD remix thing they did.
Anniversary.
There was people complaining about the graphics on that.
I thought the graphics were okay. But I'm not one of those people that everything has to be hyper-realistic, so...
No. I mean, there's a place for it, but I think it hurts the game's chance of being... Timeless. Perfect. Now, some of you guys may know this simply because of Miyazaki's Ghibli studio played a very large part in it. But Ni no Kuni, also known as The Another World, January 2013 is when it's supposed to come out in the US. It is gorgeous to look at. It looks like a Miyazaki film playing out on your TV screen in 3D graphics. I wish it didn't play so much like a horrible Pokemon kind of knockoff, because I've seen some streams of it. The point being, it is a gorgeous game to just look at and say, yeah, why don't we have more games that look like this? And
I'm looking forward to it. I'm probably going to be picking that one up for sure, because if I don't, I'll hear about it from Sydney. So,
and it rated really highly. So my initial judgment should be weighted upon. Maybe I just don't understand the system very well. I do want to mention that atmospheric effects plays a big role in Immersion too, and it has for a very long time. I know there's been like rain and stuff in other video games dating way back, but I think the first time people really took note of its impact in a video game was the first time they witnessed it rain on A Link to the Past for the Super Nintendo.
Ah, yes.
That very first, all you hear is the rain and Link's foot going in the rain. That was one of those earliest moments of people really feeling the atmospheric effects of immersion.
It helps for things like rain, that when you can see the ground, it's actually hitting the ground, and, you know, the puddles in the ground, because otherwise it's just static on a screen.
Yeah, just some pixels that look like little droplets doing the same patterns over and over.
This is an interesting thing that I found in WoW. There's weather and climate in WoW, and it's random per zone, but in the zones where it rains, if you sit there and jump up and down, you'll start to notice that the rain will change because of the motion of the camera. You'll notice that the rain will go with your jumps, you know, up and down. There's almost gaps where there is no rain. But yeah, that kind of trick is interesting, but ultimately it can be just as immersive breaking as it is immersive.
And so while we could get into various gameplay elements that actually change the way that we play games and make them more immersive, I think with our remaining time we'll just go ahead and some of the story elements. And we've talked a little bit about this in past episodes, but things like branching stories where your decisions actually matter to the gameplay. And this includes things like multiple dialogue choices, even when they don't. And then there's also the whole good versus evil paths in a lot of games, like Knights of the Old Republic and Infamous. I think it does more than just add replayability. It adds more an investment into your personal character. So whether you're playing Mass Effect or Skyrim, the choices you make create a character that's more of your own. And I think that's always an immersive detail, unless you're going for an all-out story, trying to follow a specific character, say Max Payne, where his narrations drive it, and you're just following his story, which is plenty immersive in itself, but we're talking about the gimmicks that are a little different than what you would see in like a Hollywood movie.
Agreed. I like building my own character. Part of me dislikes the whole character creation modeler because there's so many options and so many things that you can do that's what I end up spending the most time on. Is that
I
initial
actually
character
don't have
creation.
too much problem with that myself. I think that's once again one of the reasons why City of Heroes met me on a level that I enjoyed a lot more than other MMOs. Is I could closer build a character that I would want to play instead of having a few set designs for me, and I can just customize certain little things that I'll never get to see anyway, because unless they're in a cutscene, I'm going to be you're looking at their back the whole time.
Yeah.
So when you have a game that allows you some physical customizations, on the one hand, I love it simply because that customization is there. It can allow me to take different routes and paths and stuff just visually. But I don't think it does anything for the immersion itself. Unlike story choices could, because the story choices, it puts you in a situation that makes you make decisions, whereas otherwise you're just playing dress up. And as somebody that's played Second Life for quite extensively there for a while, I can get lost in the whole dress up thing.
It's pretty easy to do.
Yes, I'm a guy. I can still admit this.
Well, you did mention story, and you mentioned character creation, and part of Mass Effect's character creation is choosing your character's background.
Mm-hmm.
But the problem with that is that I spent, some time actually thinking about what kind of Commander Shepard I would want my lawful good character Commander Shepard to be, and it's mentioned once in the entire game after you make that decision. So you spend this time thinking you're about to make a meaningful decision, and then it's basically, I wouldn't even say that it's in the game as often as what your character looks like, because you look at your character the whole time.
I think that's more of a design flaw than an
yeah, I think so too. So glad I spent so much time deciding what decision to make on that.
I think Dragon Age Origins did this really well. Its first part of its character creation, each one of those different character archetypes literally come with their own tutorial short story at the beginning, depending on the choices you made for that character. And it usually varied simply by the race, but the gender and the background also made some changes into how the characters would originally interact. You've been really quiet today.
You have.
Immersion for me is just so vague. We could go into 10,000 different discussions about immersion. It doesn't take a lot for a game to drag me in. If they at least try, then they can most likely get me drawn into the game.
I'm a lot the same way. I don't need a lot of really deep drama. I don't need a lot of ho-ho-ha-ha funniness. As long as I can find something to enjoy about the game, I'll enjoy the game. And that's why my hate list is probably so small.
Yeah, I don't have a big hate list. Here's just a fun question to end the show with. Have you guys ever sat down and played a game so much in 1 week that you thought about maybe going, like, let's say you wanted something to eat, you're like, I need to go to McDonald's, and you reach in your pocket, you have no cash, you're like, I need to go do some quests first. Oh wait, this is real life. Or I need to go kill a monster to see if I get some gold. Oh wait, this is real life. Has that ever happened to you? You gotta be honest.
No, I haven't had that happen before. I have had dreams, though, where I played a game so much that I start dreaming about it.
Yeah, I do that a lot too.
But as far as a game interacting with real life in such a way, I think the main offender is The Sims.
Oh, yeah.
And the reason for that is it gets you in a mindset of efficiency so much that if you play it so much, you start visiting those meters in your head. Okay, when in my day do I need to take my shower? When in my day do I need to eat? How much time can I devote to such and such before I need to go to this or that and the other? And it even started affecting my bladder, where I would see what efficient point of the day when I needed to go to the bathroom that I could be doing something else either on the way or on the way back. So, yes.
Wow.
See, fun question.
There you go.
Holy.
But yeah, I've thought about it'll just be something in passing, like that split second feeling, like, man, I need to get some more gold. You're like, oh wait, we use dollars. I have to earn that by working.
Go a little River City Ransom and crack some bad guys over the head so they turn into coins. Oh wait,
Yes.
It's got Pilgrim reference. In a somewhat passing reference before we close the show, I understood that, now don't quote me on this, I only heard the numbers, I haven't heard the numbers on the other movies, but I understood that last weekend's Wreck-It Ralph opened for $49 million that weekend, which trumped everything, almost all of them combined. And I understand it is the most successful animated weekend of this year. Still, I'm really glad that something video game related actually did well. The only problem is I've heard the story now, and it is doing something exactly what I was afraid it was going to do. The trailer is very misleading, and I'm not going to do any spoilers here. I'm just going to warn for the people that haven't quite seen it yet. Supposedly, the first half is completely awesome. The references and everything is just perfect. And as soon as Ralph gets to a certain point in the story, I'll call it that way, he gets stuck in that Candyland racing game. That is the rest of the movie.
Oh.
But still, the fact that it did so well, it's promising that there's going to be more movies like this. Matter of fact, there's already talk about a sequel involving multiplayer online games, which is a whole other can of worms there for all sorts of references that could be really fun. Matter of fact, maybe Yahtzee's book could be made into one. But that is our show for this week for November 10th, 2012. Join us every Monday for the next PrinnyCast. You can catch us on Twitter at PrinnyCast, and you can email us at PrinnyCast@gmail.com. Don't forget to check out Grover's Game of the Week. Links provided down below to go to his channel. Anything else?
Buy Game Fuel.
You don't sponsor us.
But it's delicious. And people need to buy it more so because of permanent flavor.
I see where this is going. This is more of a self-serving thing, isn't it?
Yes, exactly. I like Mountain Dew Game Fuel. I get excited when a new game comes out that is sponsored by it because it means I get to drink more.
Don't forget the week after next begins the next gen of gaming. It is finally here with the launch of the Wii U. So I'm Chris.
I'm Grover.
I'm Mike.
And we'll see you next Monday.
Adios.
Goodbye.